do first is share a video to center the conversation as you begin to share your own stories and then introduce your work. So give me a minute while I put that on.
Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
So thank you. For me, this was a really powerful poem by Lucille Clifton. And the story behind this particular poem of hers is that she was a faculty member and she had her door open in her office one day and she heard a white faculty member tell another colleague that the department wasted its money on hiring her. And she went into her office and she wrote this poem. And so I think it's fitting as we're talking about anti-racist practice. The morning session talked quite a bit about how do we do this, especially in supporting our students, but then also thinking about how do faculty and staff of color on our campuses and in our institutions receive the kind of support that they need because they themselves are engaging in anti-racist pedagogy and practice. And so with that, I invite you to share your own stories as well as your work as we move through our keynote today. Thank you. Meredith, you want to start?
Big Watch Marisol, that was such a beautiful and moving way to start us. Bonjour, Indinoema Ganidog, Meredith McCoy, Indishnakas, Chujau Knendodam, Nokamanji Mekanakoju Gayega Kabakangandao. Good morning, everyone. My name is Meredith McCoy. My dad, David McCoy, is a citizen of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, and I am currently located in Kakabakang in our Badeotaotunwe in Minneapolis. I would like to start by sharing with you just a little bit about how I got here, and so I'm going to share my screen. All right, can you see that all right? Okay, thank you. So it's important to me as an Indigenous scholar to start by grounding myself in the people who have shaped my understanding of the world. So the people that you have on this slide are my dad here as a high schooler, my mom here at 5 with my mom, her mom, her mom, and her mom. And to me, that's such a powerful image of the kind of intergenerational knowledge transfer that I try to think about centering in my own teaching practice. The folks on this slide are all in their own ways engaged in education or in public service. So my dad worked in state government as an Indian law attorney and as a public health practitioner for all of his career and as a teacher. My mom was a teacher. Her mom and her dad were both teachers. And then it's important for me to note, too, that I bring into this space with me my great-grandparents, my dad's grandparents, who were both students in the federal Indian boarding school system. And so when I think about my obligations as a teacher to engage in anti-racist work and also to think about what it means to decolonize spaces of colonial education, I think about the kinds of violences that were inflicted upon my family and also the kinds of resistances that my family has enacted over the generations. As I mentioned to you, I'm calling in today from what is Dakota territory, from Mdewakanton and Wapekute territory in what is currently otherwise known as Minnesota. For those of you who are not aware whose lands you're on, I encourage you to find out. This website here, native-land.ca, is one tool to be able to do that. It's an imperfect tool. The makers of the website say that quite openly when you log in, but it's a place to begin. And I encourage you to find that out, not so that you can recite it in some sort of, look, I can recite where I am, but so that you understand what it means to start being in a form of obligation and relation to those people whose homelands you're occupying. So if we are there, how are we paying rent? And I say this as an Ojibwe person occupying Dakota territory. What does it mean to engage in practices that are reciprocal and to be in good relation? We, of course, can't set those terms. We have to be listening and asking what it means for us to be in good relation and then acting on those answers that we receive. So a lot of people hear this and they start thinking immediately, oh, this is decolonization. And I want to be really clear about what I mean when I say decolonization, what it is, and what I don't think that it is. So in brief, and this is going to get back to what Marisol was saying about labor practices in higher education and the way that BIPOC folks are treated in these institutions. Decolonization is not just saying, look, we've added indigenous people to our list of communities that we serve. It's not building a project and then at the very last minute saying, oh, we needed an indigenous person on the project. Let's put someone here. It's not a shift to saying a land acknowledgement at the beginning of every meeting and then not doing anything about it. And it's not trying to make indigenous frameworks, indigenous knowledge systems fit in to Western systems. These things are incommensurable in many situations. So it's about how we remake systems to be more open to indigenous knowledges. Now, to that point of what Dr. Morales, what Marisol was sharing, this went viral a couple of weeks ago on Twitter, and it is an indictment of the kinds of labor practices that indigenous faculty and also, I should say, students face in institutions of higher education. So I want to draw your attention to these, Dr. Lara Jacobs and Dr. Leilani Subzalian, talking about the kinds of things that indigenous faculty are often asked to do. A few weeks ago, or I suppose it was last term, pandemic time, I was informed by my chair that another faculty member had gone to her and said, oh, but Meredith was just hired to implement the land acknowledgement. She doesn't actually do any research or teaching, right? Ignoring my entire basis as a scholar, right? Very similar to the story that Marisol shared about an institution, what they see our labor as being. Now, I feel very lucky at Carleton that I have a lot of colleagues who are actively countering that perception and who are working to lift up my scholarship and my teaching, some of the folks who are on this call. But I just want to note that as a trend, I have never spoken to an indigenous faculty member who has not had this experience. So decolonization can't be that. It can't be looping in indigenous faculty and students and saying we're doing this representational work. What it is rebuilding systems from the ground up. So that can mean reinvesting in systems of indigenous governance and education. It can mean restoring indigenous intellectual systems and reinvesting in indigenous languages, making sure your institution is teaching the language of the land where it currently is located. It can mean creating and protecting space for indigenous people to reconnect with our territories, to be in good relation with our territories in the ways that we want to be. It can mean breaking down colonial understandings of gender and sexuality and identity, and even who constitutes a person. And it can mean dismantling colonial systems of harm. So thinking about ways of being in relation with one another that are non-punitive, that are abolitionist. And so when we're thinking about higher education and our learning environments, I want us to think about ways of creating learning spaces that are deeply engaged in place and in relation with the peoples whose lands we're on in ways that are non-punitive, in ways that are intergenerational and bring elders and students together as co-creators of the curricula that we're teaching, as being deeply place-based, and that does not mean walking outside of our buildings on campus because we're scared of COVID. That means letting the land guide our teaching in ways that are experiential and individualized so that each student's gifts and talents are guiding their own learning, in ways that are interdisciplinary, that dissolve these ideas that somehow the humanities are separate from the sciences or somehow separate from the arts, but see them all as being deeply intertwined, that are built from the place where they occur and are grounded in the sense of obligation that we, by virtue of being here, have an obligation to the peoples whose lands we occupy, and we have to let them set the terms of how we enact those obligations. I can't sit here and tell you how to do this work. Each of us has to figure out how to do this work in our own context by listening and by coming in good faith, by showing up, and by acting when people tell us they need us to act. So I'm going to throw up just some quick questions here that I want you to kind of take away as questions to think about when you're thinking about doing this work. One is, why am I doing this? If I'm doing this just because it's the fad, because people are saying that anti-racism and decolonization are the current it thing, then that's not the right reason. If we're doing this because we need it for our own sense of well-being, because we need it to be in good relation with each other, then we should act on those things. We need to enter into this with humility and thinking about what are our knowledges that we have, what are the knowledges that we lack, and where do we get them? We need to reckon with the colonial histories of the places and the disciplines that we're working in, and I know we're going to hear more about that as we go. So, briefly, the way I approach this, my current alternative to thinking about decolonization as the framework, and the way that that word is sometimes being cheated out of its meaning, is to go to what I think is really at the heart of decolonization, which for me is the 4 R's. Now, this is from LaDonna Harris and Jacqueline Wasilewski, but many other Indigenous folks have talked about similar versions of this. And that's just grounding our work and our community engagement in relationship, in responsibility, in reciprocity, and in redistribution in ways that directly counter inequitable histories and current dynamics of power and profit. So I want to preview that I'll talk about this more in our conversation. There are 2 ACE classes, academic civic engagement classes, that I teach at Carleton where I'm trying to do this work with students. One where we're responding to the priorities of a community partner, and the other where we're trying to excavate the histories of exploitation on our own campus. And I know that when I throw these things at folks, they frequently leave with this energy of, I need to know what to do. And so while I'm telling you that I can't tell you what to do, these are a number of issues that are active in Indian country right now that you can consider learning more about, and ultimately that you need to be asking questions about in your local context. So what are the priorities of the Native nations and the urban Indigenous communities whose land your institution occupies? What are their goals? Maybe they might be addressing some of these issues, and how can you partner with them, walking alongside them, and in some cases taking the back seat as they guide you for what they need. I'll stop there and turn it over to Nicole Big Watch.
Thank you very much, Meredith. That was such a powerful start. I will go ahead and share my screen now. Oh, maybe not. One second, sorry about that. Okay. This is what happens when you have dual screens. All right, I am very much a storyteller. Excuse me, I don't know which screen you are seeing, so hopefully it's not the one with my notes. Nope, okay, great. All right, I'm very much a storyteller and a visual person. So what I'm going to do today is talk about what this term or terms, anti-racism and being inclusive means within the context of my work, who I am as a Black woman that sits at a predominantly white institution, who has often been silenced but has found my voice. So I'd like to start off by sharing with you where I came from, and not so much taking you back to my roots, but where did my work and walk begin? And it began in this cell, a 6.4 by 5.4 meter cell within South Africa. As a graduate student, I had the opportunity, I was one of the first graduate students to see Nelson Mandela inaugurated, 3 weeks after, sorry, he was inaugurated. And I had a chance to go to Robben Island to see where this man spent the majority of his life. It was at that moment that I was able to really begin to understand how a group of people had this transformational experience, but how that transformed me as a scholar, as a Black woman coming from Caribbean roots, someone who understood what it meant to be marginalized, excluded. And so walking away from that experience, I was able to then transition into a position at Penn State, where often this was my reality. I would be in a room with chairs, and those chairs were filled with folks who often did not look like me. But more importantly, the individuals, the young people's lives whom I was trying to study and understand how they walked, how they kind of made meaning of their civic spaces, why they weren't filling these seats. And I began to look at some of the work that was being done by scholars from different fields. And I began to ask myself, how do I contribute my voice and actions to these invisible and silent spaces? Because oftentimes as a scholar, you're asked to suppress your actions and put it in writing. You're expected to, your scholarship is expected to speak for you. But I knew where I came from, those individuals who walked the walk before me, that they weren't just scholars of words, they were scholars in action. And so if we look at the work of Aimé Césaire, he says, I am talking about societies drained of their essence, cultures trampled underfoot, institutions undermined, lands confiscated, religions smashed, magnificent artistic creations destroyed, extraordinary possibilities wiped out. And so when we think about this notion of being excluded and why we have to turn to these types of conversations about anti-racist behaviors, this centers much of my work. These individuals whom I study or engage with, this is what it means. And so this saying is very important because I talk a lot about historical legacies. So engaging with greater purpose and representation of Black and Brown youth. This is the center of my work, and it has helped me to think about how do we create within the context of civic engagement and service learning, a culture that disrupts the idea of who can and who is co-creating knowledge, resources, and the capacity. So oftentimes we talk about this notion of civic engagement or service learning as we taking students into a place so they can learn from the community or they can help those others. I remember teaching a class and I asked the question, why are you in this class? And this one student was bold enough to say, I'm here to help the brown kids in the community. And it was at that moment that I said, oh, we need to have a really candid conversation. But what it showed me is that these young people that we engage with on our community campuses really don't understand that we are here to co-create knowledge, to learn from these communities. But in order for you to do that, you really have to understand their legacies, their histories, their traumas. And this is why I say we need to begin the conversation about recentering and centering our scholarship and our work, even the words that we use. So as Meredith pointed out, I think so vividly in her presentation about what that looks like within the context of the work that she does, I'm going to pivot a bit and talk about the historic, acknowledging the legacies and histories of individuals and creating, enforcing inclusive practices and culture. And oftentimes we say, well, we're including this reading or we're helping students to think about these contexts and terms. But I'm going to say we need to take a step back and help these students understand, why is it that we're even having these conversations? What is it that has caused us to be in this place? So if we look at these three individuals, so if you don't know who they are, I would strongly suggest that you look them up. So this is Frantz Fanon, who was a French Caribbean psychiatrist who wrote a lot about negritude and anti-Blackness in his work. We have Stephen Biko, who was a South African activist. And then we have Aimé Césaire, who also was someone who was very much on this anti-Blackness, negritude journey. And so what I say, why I brought all these three together is because they really talk about the historical legacies. And so when I say the historical legacy, it really relates to the question of how history matters in the contemporary world and this extent to which it can explain politics, the economy, culture, and social attitudes at the current times and tide. So the reason why this is important is we have to help our students understand what happened in the past is affecting why you're going into that community. Why talking to the elders are important. Why is it important for you to be in the context of people who've walked this walk, who've bled, who've died, who've cried, and who have marched tirelessly for you to be here? I also say that we need to name it, naming it and showing up. So we've talked about the historical legacies, but we also have to name it. And what does that mean? Excuse me. It means that in our scholarship, so this is a recent article that actually I just published, and no, I'm not trying to self-promote, but I thought it would be a great graphic to really help.
It's okay to self-promote.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Marisol. For us to understand, when we talk about civic engagement, oftentimes it will start in the present. It will start with some of these more recent movements. But we have to understand, let's take it back. What is Pan-Africanism? Where was that happening? When did it begin? Looking at the NAACP, the SCLC. And so there's a lot of history here, but we have to name it. We have to be unafraid and unapologetic to say this is what it is and this is what it isn't. We have to understand how these relationships between political suppression, cultural oppression, and these interpersonal and personal and public interactions, how they all have the ability to translate and transcend individuals into doing better. We also need to, let me just go back. We also need to take personal responsibility. And so what does that mean? As scholars, we have to engage, reflect, and act. So naming it and showing up also means stop glossing over the curriculum that makes you feel uncomfortable. If you know that you are not in a position to talk about certain concepts, find someone who can, but that doesn't mean that you don't talk about it. Also, we need to make sure that we take personal responsibility, being intentional with your words and actions. I think oftentimes we gloss over things, we gloss over concepts, we gloss over ideas because we don't want to be that person who stands out on a limb. And so I bring you to a close with a poem that I wrote because oftentimes the communities, the students, and the individuals with whom I work with, this is their story. I am who I am because of those who came before me, setting the tone for how I walk, talk, stand, and see the world and all that it can and all that it should be. This is who I am and always will be. Thank you. I'll pass it over now to Lori.
Wow, thank you so much, Nicole. That was beautiful. That was stunning. And thank you also, Meredith and Dr. Marisol Morales. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and for all of you beautiful faces that I can't necessarily see with my eyes, but I can see in my heart. So excited to be here. Now I'm going to share my screen and compliment some of this beautiful work that has been shared with all of you so far. Buenas tardes. I'm going to start by acknowledging the land and the people. Why am I doing this? Because I feel, first of all, that I have to. I feel an obligation to do that. I feel happy to do that, to acknowledge the complexity and the privilege, right? Right now, I'm living in the boundaries of the Chumash in Ventura County, California. I've also previously lived amongst the Maori in Aotearoa, New Zealand, who actually taught me some of my indigenous ways of being that I did not know growing up. I do this to be responsible, to be conscious, a co-conspirator with indigenous folks, as I continue to learn to expand my walk on the path wherever I am. I want to bring in 3 words: humility, grace, and integrity into this conversation in anti-racism work. I think it's really important to do that. And there I am over there with my friend Kat, she's Lakota, on Satwiwa land, and we're doing just a little round dance there, just blessing the land. The images are really important. Nací en Sevilla, España. I was born in Sevilla, Spain. My rivers, the Guadalquivir. My mountains are La Sierra Morena. My peoples. This is basically my DNA story. I was again taught by the Aotearoa in Aotearoa, New Zealand, by the Maori. You know, when you introduce yourself as an indigenous person, Lori, you got to let people know like who you are, where you're from, who are your people. I'm from a lot of places. I'm a Louisiana Creole. I mean, we got a lot going on. But here's where it really starts with Marion Faye Callahan Harris, my mom, of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and Alvin Johnson Sr., Morgan City, Baton Rouge. And we got deep roots with the Oklahoma Choctaw. These are my folks, my elders, Ma and Dad, Mama Sally, Grandpa Richard, Mother Dear, and Daddy George. These are my people. These are my roots. This is my heritage. And I ground myself in this work. I want to offer you today a compliment to the work that Meredith shared with you, where as a Black Indigenous person, I would be remiss to not look at what all of this what decolonization is. I've been asked to, based on my work also with the Mixteco community here in California, migrant Indigenous folks from Mexico, to do decolonization work. And it struck me, like, why are you asking me to do decolonization work? First of all, I'm not from this place. The people that are from this place are here. And second of all, again, why are you asking me? BIPOC is not a trend. I was born this way. I've been doing this work all my life. Please don't. And so I started to deeply look deep within myself and with the Indigenous folks that I have had opportunities to work with, the elders, to get some wisdom. And they said, you're right. You don't decolonize. I'm like, thank you. But you do work with us. Oh, okay. You are doing co-decolonization. You work with us. As Nicole was talking about this co-creation, there's co-decolonization. It's when one is being invited, asked, or otherwise directly implied. For me, in my case, luckily, I was actually employed, right? But attracted to the work and hired to the work because of my background. It's when you're working on behalf of, alongside, in service to, or to benefit Indigenous folks who are rewriting, in the words of Linda Tuhiwai Smith, a Maori scholar, the Maori scholar, I should say. And it requires us to act in the capacity of altruistic service within this context of community engagement without the need or requirement for reciprocity. Actually, it's a giving of oneself, selfless humility, setting aside, stepping away from one's ego. It's a little spiritual, might be considered spiritual, loving thy neighbor, unconditional love, just bringing some other words into the space. This picture of me and my daughter, Kenya, at our Black Lives Matter rally here in New Zealand, or excuse me, here in Ventura. Remember what Meredith taught us about decolonization. Decolonization is Indigenous in nature. It is not something for non-Indigenous people to be doing. It is folks rewriting their positions in history, or our positions in history, people who have been systemically or structurally oppressed. When we tell our own stories, we write our own versions, like Nicole just showed us, in our own ways for our own purposes. It's mind, body, spirit work, and it's an all-in enterprise. Here's some images of what co-decolonization looks like. It is intergenerational. It happens in many, many places. It actually requires one, probably some of you are saying, well, how do I do this work? You have to be willing to ask yourself, what am I willing to give up? What am I willing to give up in order to work with, for, alongside, and on behalf of other people? So something to be thinking about in all of these spaces. I had to give up something gladly. Do I look depleted? No, I'm good. Because of the R's and the P's that Meredith shared. I'm good. And finally, I want to share with you a model or an idea. Applied critical leadership, I am going to self-promote. maybe some of you have seen my work, applied critical leadership in higher ed and in cross education, lots and lots of work. This is applied critical leadership 5.0, I've decided. That's what co-decolonization is. And as you can see on this model, it is about decentering whiteness. Anti-racist work is about decentering whiteness in leadership, in research, and all of our endeavors in education. It's about finding out where we are on a continuum, because we're all on a continuum. And this work is for all of us. We just have to find where we are located on the continuum. Are we in a place where we're in a cultural destructive place where there's people are color evasive, colorblind? Are we moving toward cultural competence? And you know, these words, they make my skin crawl, but it's a reality, right? Are we moving toward culturally sustaining pedagogies, culturally responsive, culturally relevant? Remember all these words? Yeah, where are we going with this? We're decentering whiteness and we're moving toward anti-colonialism. That's where we're going in anti-racist work. And so I want us in this moment to think about, you know, how does it feel in your body, your mind, and your spirit to think, I'm doing decolonizing work? Does that resonate with you? Is that real? Are we really doing that? Are you indigenous? Are you working on your land with your people for your water and your air? Are you? Or would you like to look and work, maybe would you like to work with some co-decolonizing aspects? Find your people, find where you are located, find those folks and see what you can do to work alongside with, for, you know, to sustain the work that is there. I would like to end by just giving you a few ideas. What is applied critical leadership? It's emancipatory practice of choosing to address issues and challenging using a critical race perspective. Oh, I said the bad word. Yes, CRT, time to embrace. If this is the work that you want to do, you gotta get cozy with it, right? In initiating critical and courageous conversations. I just read this thing about brave conversations with white folks that are doing brave conversations. It looked very familiar, but I'm not naming names or pointing fingers. Consensus building. Deliberate work toward disrupting negative racial, cultural, linguistic, class, gender stereotypes. Enacting leadership as of giving back. Creating and disseminating information on critical issues. There are so many of these points that I could hit, but I'm not going to. I want to invite you to explore applied critical leadership. I want to invite you to explore where you are on a continuum of decolonizing or co-decolonizing in your spaces. And I just want to encourage you and all of you to keep doing the work, keep at it. Look inside of yourself, work from your own identity, work from your strength. Applied critical leadership is about finding the strength of your experience, whether it be wherever your experience is, go with your strength. Don't try on other people's strengths or other people's abilities or identities. Start with yourself. That's the best place to start. So thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Marisol. Thanks.
Thank you all. So powerful. And I'm seeing a lot of love in the chat. I do want to ask, in your individual experiences doing this work, we got a question about this in the first discussion where they were talking about the principles that they developed for anti-racist work. But what has been the pushback that you have experienced on your campuses for trying to do this work? And any one of you can jump in.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Start. I'm new. I was hired to write the land acknowledgement. I have the paperwork right over here. And I'm like, really? My title is Director of Faculty Development and Inclusive Excellence. I came to develop your faculty so that you can better meet the needs of our students. Not going to write your land acknowledgement for you. I'm sorry. So pushback is around people thinking that they know what diversity, equity, and inclusion work is, people who think they know what anti-racist work is, and they think that I'm an expert, so I will do all of it, all by my lonesome, in my little office with no staff. So that's some of the pushback that I'm receiving, defining myself on my terms what my work is. I am an expert. I have been doing this work for 22 some odd years. I will let you know what my expertise is, and I will let you know what the work is that will be done. You have to look at me as a peer or a superior for some of you who want to call me an expert, and let me define the work for you within the basis of the job description. But you all know a job description for us is just kind of a piece of paper. There are some things that we have to do, right? But there's some things that we do. We just do. Right. So those are my pushback. Working with it.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank
Meredith?
you. I would say that there are two pushbacks, and they may seem a bit strange to point out, but I think the first pushback is not acknowledging the invisible labor that comes with doing this work. I think, as Lori just said, we do what we do, not because it's written in our job description, but we do what we do because we know it's right. And we know that the person or the persons who sacrificed for me to sit here to actually give this talk today, they didn't have those opportunities. So this is why we do what we do, but that never gets acknowledged. And the other pushback, I think, is there are not enough of us BIPOC individuals, those people who identify as being part of these groups, that their scholarship is being acknowledged, included, and being upheld as standards and good work. So it always has to be benchmarked against others, and that burns me up. So that's a whole nother conversation. We won't go there. But I think that for me is where that pushback is. And the pushback is silent, because we know that Ivory Tower operates within these systems. And so until someone has the wherewithal, the ability to change that, we're going to continue working this way. Well, hopefully not, but yeah.
I could echo a lot of the things that have been said already. I'll just add that I think one of the things that strikes me as a challenge is the desire to do things quickly. That in higher education, it seems like it's just, okay, well, here's a thing and let's knock it out. Let's get on to the next publication. Let's achieve this strategic goal and just move on. And relationships are slow. They have to be slow. And so, when I think about my work, when I think about building ACE partnerships, I can't just arrive in a place and start doing those things immediately. And I'm fortunate. I've got some folks here on the call that I just want to give a shout out to at the Center for Community and Civic Engagement at Carleton. They're amazing folks who understand that relationship building is slow and requires a different set of practices. But it's things that we don't expect. It's things like the business office not being set up to handle gifting in a certain way that feels culturally appropriate, but does not align with the IRS. Or it's things like needing to tell people over and over again that Native nations are nations, that we're talking about, in our case, institution to government relationships, and that it's not just sort of a free-for-all of please go out and reach out to whoever you want a partnership with. This has actually got to be a strategic set of decision-making choices from the institution. And then the last thing I'll just say is that and this gets back to the idea that Nicole and Lori have raised about we do this because we need to, because we feel it's the right thing to do, is when we're doing a million things on campus, right? When as BIPOC scholars, or in my case as an indigenous scholar, when we're thinking about the kinds of labor that we're doing around our campuses, for me as a junior scholar, the feedback I get is you should just say no more. But I'm the only indigenous faculty on this campus. And if I don't do it, then it won't get done. And what that does is reproduces the status quo of relationships with indigenous people that have existed on this campus for the last 160 years. So I understand that sometimes that you should say no is meant as a loving thing, as a way to protect my time. But unless the institution hires more Native faculty, hires more Native staff, what's the alternative? More invisibility.
That's powerful. One of the things in the 4 years that I've been at Campus Compact, that I have tried to do has been to increase the visibility and voices of BIPOC scholars. We as an organization have had a history of not bringing those voices into the forefront. And so, and I'm the first executive of color in Campus Compact's 35-year history. And so for you, Meredith, Lori, Nicole, where you talked about this, Meredith, the first, right? The only. Talk about what that experience has been for you, where you're at.
Well, I'll just say that the load of supporting Indigenous students is important to me, and it's also a lot to bear. So, just there's so much. One of the classes that I taught recently was this class where I had 15 really earnest upper level students investigate the history of Indigenous peoples on this campus. And they could research how Carleton got its land base, how it has used its land base, the history of Native faculty and students on campus, and the history of representations of Indigenous people on campus. And the students produced really strong papers and presented them at the local public library, and they did a really great job. But what came out in that was the Native students have been making the same demands since the 80s. And they've not been realized in many cases. And so the way that then comes on me as, I'm the first, as far as we've been able to ascertain, I'm the first tenure track Native hire in the history of the college. And so the way that then falls on me to do that support work for the Native students, that of course I do because I want them to be successful, because I went to institutions with robust Native presence in students and faculty, and I want them to have that experience. But the kind of workload, that's disproportionate work, right? That's the unseen emotional labor. And then the only other thing that I'll note is that bingo sheet that I showed you in my presentation, I can check most of those. Within the first week of school, I could check most of those. And it's things that people don't expect to be harmful, right? It's reaching out to say, I respect your expertise. Can you revise my syllabus and help me do better by your community? And I understand the impetus, but at some point, we have to do our own homework. We are all scholars. We know how to use our tools, and we can all learn ourselves. And the amount of work that I get asked to do as the only Native faculty in helping other scholars do the work that I do, at a certain point, there needs to be more infrastructure to support them so that it doesn't all fall on one person.
So I will follow up with a point. So I'm going to start by saying that we as scholars of color need to stop wearing this badge of courage and honor, saying that we are the only. Even though we know it's true, oftentimes we will say it and not realize what that means. So I will tell you, I am the only Black, and however you define Black, because that's the other thing too, please stop referring to us as a monolithic group. We are not. But I am the only Black scholar, female scholar, faculty member, tenured in my entire college. There's a problem there. And so I saw in the chat, someone said, I'm going to turn to this. What can white faculty and colleagues do to support your work? In this particular example, and what we've just heard from Meredith, advocate for more diversity hires. Be the voice in the room to say, wait a minute, we have a job opening. What are we doing to make sure that it's not just sent to all the diversity listservs, but we really are making sure that we bring folks on campus for this particular position? You also need to be an advocate when you talk about diversifying or internationalizing your curriculum. I'm not sitting here and saying that I want you to be the expert, but at least as Meredith said, do your homework, but then also check with me. If you write something and you feel like this needs to be checked, it's okay to check in. But where I'm going to have a problem is if you publish it and it's not facts. as the young folks say, is not facts. So I think there needs to be some more open dialogue, some uncomfortable conversations. And we just need to call a spade, as they say, as they say, call a spade. And to my Black, Brown, Latino, indigenous scholars out there, please, let's stop wearing this red badge. I was gonna say red badge of courage. You see where my mind went. But this badge of courage, because it's the invisible labor. And I think also our white colleagues need to make sure that they are speaking up and saying, what can we do to help lift the load, but to be a support system when others won't be.
Right, and how are we more than just window dressing?
Oh, I don't want to go there, but you know.
I think you can. Go.
I'll go to the window dressing. I'm
Okay,
tired.
thank you, Lori.
I'm tired. Stacey Abrams talks about moving forward, not standing still, right? And just keep it moving, keep it going. I am sick of being the inaugural. I've been an inaugural everything. I'm an inaugural today. Every single position that I've held has been an inaugural. They like to say, oh, she's the inaugural director of faculty development and inclusive excellence. I'm like, let me not be the last. Let me not be the last. And making sure that when I'm in this position, I am building my own succession plan. Lifting while climbing. We need to lift while we climb. And I might be the only one at this campus. And so I think I might have read something in the comments about, yeah, I'm the only one too, and I'm the first one too. Reach across campuses. That's what this kind of a conversation is about. When I was a younger scholar, I do have a little bit of silver in my hair at this point, but when I was a younger scholar, I was a part of a group called Advancing Women of Color in Academia, AWOCA, and it was across campuses. We met at an AERA talk. And we're still lifting each other up, and we're still across the United States, across the world now. So I want to encourage you to reach in your institution. If there's not, reach across institutions and lift while you're climbing, because the PART or the PRT or the PT, whatever they call it at your institution for retention and promotion, it's not going to be that different. Help folks publish together. Share your stuff. I'm telling you, this is what's been done for the ages. Everybody else is doing it. Share, work together, publish together, take turns being first author. I'm sorry if I'm exposing the hidden curriculum, but you know what? I need to do that right now because I'm tired of being the inaugural, and I'm tired of the first. I'm tired of the only. It's unnecessary at this moment in time. Okay, so that's where we need to go. We know Stacey Abrams should tell us, let's go. That's what we need to do, is let's go. And that's what I think this talk is about. And I know this is not a talk that's just about us, but see us. You need see us and hear us. This is what we look like. This is what it's about. And we want to, not only for ourselves, for the greater good. I think the difference between us and other folks is we're actually wanting to lift ourselves and for our children, for our grandchildren. As my people say, 7 generations forward, 7 generations back, and right here today. Right? Okay, I'm done. Sorry about that, Dr. Bud.
No, it's just what we need. Just what we need. And I think it's true. The being the first, being the only in this year at this time, it's not good. It's not. We've got some questions that I want to make sure that we address, and then I'll come back to some additional ones. So for Nicole, you had mentioned that you shared that you just wrote a piece or just published a piece. So if you could share that with folks in the chat, that would be great. And then for Lori, folks want to know where can they purchase Applied Critical Leadership. I'm going to give a plug for you because I used Lori's work in my dissertation research and I fell in love with it. It spoke to me in the way that I have done my work, both in the community and in higher education. So yes, go get it. And yeah, let folks know where they can pick that up.
So I think someone actually put the link to the article in the chat. So there are a couple of other articles that came out this year as well. So I can share those regarding historical legacies and civic spaces. And so I will share those with Dr. Morales.
Thank you. And then also there's a question, can there be value in starting this work for the wrong reasons, e.g. everyone's doing it and through the work come to realizations of the right reasons, thinking of how not to just preach to the choir in terms of who is involved. That's deep, so.
I see Meredith smiling, so I'm gonna, you start off and then. Yeah.
I mean, I think part of it, what we have to acknowledge is that higher education is a capitalist business, right? And so our institutions are invested in doing things that promote the brand of the institution. If there are instances where we can leverage the brand of the institution, that institutional stake in its own brand as a way to do some of that redistributive work of getting the resources that our institutions have out into the community, then maybe. But I also am hesitant about building a relationship on shaky ground, right? I think we have to come to each other with transparency, with humility, with respect, with honesty, right? I'm thinking here about, as an Ojibwe person, Bema Diswin, right? Like the 7 teachings that guide me and my work and those values. If I'm not coming into a partnership with those values in mind, I don't know that the rest of that partnership is going to survive because it's not been built on a solid foundation. So I would say, in the sense of how we get our institutions to buy in, possibly. But in terms of how we start and build our relationships in place and with each other, I would be very hesitant about saying that it's possible.
Okay.
I would just add that while you mentioned we work in a capitalistic culture, we also work in a culture that is thrives on, as I say with my students, everyone wants to be a Beyonce. And so everyone wants to be the headliner. Everyone wants to be seen. And very few folks who are actually doing, the groundwork and building those relationships are the ones who are not necessarily given the credit. And so I think we also need to be careful about that face. Who is the face? Who is being put out there to communicate, to build these relationships? Why is it that oftentimes, especially in my work, so a lot of my work does take place in the global South, in historically Black indigenous communities, and it's very tiring to see sometimes that my colleagues who don't even know the culture but have been there for a trip for 2 weeks are then tapped as the expert to go and build those relationships with individuals. So I think that the culture of our institutions has to change, and understanding that we sit in this space as experts of our own communities and communities that look like us. And until that is recognized and institutionalized, we will continue to see some of that happening. I see I'm smiling at all the chats because I feel like folks are like right here with us. So we feel you.
Yeah, there's a lot of love here. I do have a question from someone. So this person's asking, often as a graduate woman of color, the only Afro-Latina in the last number of PhD cohorts in their program, it's intimidating to bring up these issues, concerns to white administrators, chairs, deans. I don't feel safe to bring up the concerns out of fear of being excluded from opportunities, writing, publishing, teaching, or stirring up the pot. Any suggestions about overcoming these feelings?
I'd like to address that. And I think that I think you need to find your people. They might not look like you. I believe that you need to, when you're working toward your own professional development and your committees and whatnot, just listen for a little bit. Your allies will out themselves because they want to help. And so pay attention to who those people are and establish relationships with those people. Don't waste your time trying to get close to folks that have not necessarily, who you think might be the ones are not those ones necessarily. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Just pay attention and align yourself. I mean, it is strategic. I hate to say this, and I really think deeply about this, I have been strategizing my whole life in academia. I did take a 5-year break, and I don't want to discourage anyone, but I did overdo it. For 5 years, I had to step out and just do research for a while. I actually got sick. So, but I'm wiser now. I'm back. I'm very strong. I'm wiser for it. And I think that you need to use your energy, the few energy packets that we have a day, very strategically. And you will find that with working with different folks, it will give you the energy. Distribution is part of the work that Meredith shared, redistribution. You also need to be a part of the redistribution. You cannot carry the load. We cannot carry the load by ourselves. We have to find people to help us. That's the way it's been. Go back, Mahatma, Martin, everybody. No one did this work by themselves. Everybody distributed the work. So you got to find your allies. They may be on campus with you. They may be at the yoga shala. They may be at the cafe. They may be at the community building bikes for the kids. They might be at the YMCA. They may not necessarily be on campus. That's what I love about community engagement. Find your allies, make that part of your work. And believe me, my mom used to say, many hands make light the work. So find your many hands, and that will help you and that will sustain you. If you're feeling tired, stop and look around and find your people. That is what I would have to say. We're community oriented people anyway. So find your people.
Yeah, and I would add to that, invite me to campus. I'm happy to ask those questions to your deans, administrators, right? That is part of our civic action plan work. We are asking institution, what is your reputation of harm, right? Where is diversity, equity, inclusion connected to your community engagement work? So we also have started these anti-racism communities of practice, and we'll be talking about that in the next session. Those have been powerful spaces for folks who are experiencing these kinds of things on campus to come together with others and really deeply think about that, but also to find their own people. Our Engaged Scholars Initiative is about connecting early career community engagement faculty and staff to build build that tribe, right? Build that community, build that connection, so folks can make sure that we are not falling into the trap of higher ed about individualistic, success, that we are building based on community, right? Any other last things? We've got time for one more question, but go ahead.
Do you mind? I don't know who asked that question, but and this is for all the 390 people on the call. Please, yes, you can reach out to me, but to that graduate student, please reach out to me, because I talk a lot about this with the students of color that come into our program, and not just students of color, but all students, and what that means in terms of survival in a graduate program. But I talk about the 3 concentric circles. So please come and talk to me, because send me a message, because yes, I have lots to share. The echo what Dr. Santamaria said, but I have some other examples as well.
So we'll finish with this last question. How do we recenter and build together from the ground up without burdening scholars who are constantly burdened? If we start the project without them, then it's not building from the ground up and working together. But if we do the homework without them and get the ball rolling to carry more of the weight, but then either not consult the individual who is both expert and person with lived experience, or bring them in, then it's insulting.
I can kick off by saying that first and foremost, if you are, let's say you're engaging with a community and you have an idea of what you want to do, that's it, you have an idea. So you have an outline, you have a framework. And so when you invite those individuals who need to be a part of that conversation, you're doing just that. You're inviting them to be a part of the conversation. You're inviting them to contribute. You're not inviting them just to be a fly on the wall in order to, and I saw somebody put in the chat, check a box, or to say, well, we have
window dressing.
Yes, that window dressing, we have that representation. So really strategically thinking about what expertise this person brings to that space besides just their culture, their color, or their language. And what they can contribute to the success of the project, because it goes beyond just culture. It's the relationship building, it's the theme, or whatever is happening within that particular context. And so I think that often is where there's a disconnect. I'm invited for multiple reasons. And now with my age, I can see, this ain't it. So I know I need to take a step back and figure out where's my space. But I think we're coming at this as a facilitator or an organizer with good intentions. You're going to have people who not only show up, but show out by bringing other people who can assist. And what did Lori just say? Many hands lighten the load. That's what you do. Each one reach one. If you approach us with good intentions.
And let us decide. Don't assume for us.
Yeah,
let us decide.
Expectations are so important. So here's a word that we don't use very often, but you have to find out what are I ask people just straight, so what are your expectations of me? Why did you invite me here? Based on what aspect of my expertise did you need? And people are stunned. They're like, we invited her because she's Black and she speaks Spanish and she's indigenous. Why does she think? No, what are your expectations? And then I let them know what my expectations are. And if it doesn't match, what did Nicole say? I just bounce. Doesn't match? Okay, thank you. I'm not your person. And maybe I can invite this person because I'm sorry, or that doesn't fit my work field or whatever, my goals right now, and with a smile, I'm not being nasty, but just, you're not inviting me to something just because of this, or because of or because of, or this. Don't invite me for that. I am not your window dressing. I have an expertise, I have an area, and it may not match yours just because I look like this. So be able to, and you're not saying no just because you're saying no to be nasty. You're saying no for a really good reason.
So those are such brilliant answers, both of you. Thank you. The only thing I'll add is this idea of a burden is relative. So it's a burden because of scarcity. And if we advocate for the additional space for BIPOC scholars in our institutions in the way that we've already talked about on this call, many hands make light work. That's the theme, it sounds like, at the end of the call. If we have more folks able to take it up, then it's less burdensome and we're more likely to be able to say yes when it comes around.
Awesome. That we are at time. I just want to thank you all so much. This has been such a beautiful healing space, all and more than I imagined during our first kind of inspiration for who would be on this call. So mil gracias, many thanks. I just want to remind folks that we are moving towards a 10-minute break. You can get off and come back. I'll throw the agenda in the chat. You will have the opportunity to pick one of two breakout sessions. One is focused on the anti-racism community of practice that Campus Compact put together. And the second one is focused on conducting anti-racist community engaged research. So think about which ones you want, take a look at the descriptions, and we will see you back at 2 p.m. Eastern, whatever the 00s are in the time zone that you are located. Again, many thanks to my sisters in the struggle here. Muchísimas gracias.